A reading from the book of Deuteronomy. Moses spoke to all the people, saying, "A prophet like me will the Lord your God raise up for you from among your own kin. To him you shall listen. This is exactly what you requested of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, 'Let us not again hear the voice of the Lord our God, nor see this great fire any more, lest we die.' And the Lord said to me, 'This was well said. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their kin, and will put my words into his mouth. He shall tell them all that I command him. Whoever will not listen to my words, which he speaks in my name, I myself will make him answer for it. But if a prophet presumes to speak in my name, an oracle that I have not commanded him to speak, or speaks in the name of other gods, he shall die." Verbum Domini.
Let us sing joyfully to the Lord. Let us acclaim the rock of our salvation. Let us come into his presence with thanksgiving. Let us joyfully sing psalms to him. If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. Come, let us bow down in worship. Let us kneel before the Lord who made us. For he is our God, and we are the people he shepherds, the flock he guides. If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. Oh, that today you would hear his voice. Harden not your hearts as at Meribah, as in the day of Massa in the desert, where your fathers tempted me. They tested me, though they had seen my works. If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts.
A reading from the first letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians. Brothers and sisters, I should like you to be free of anxieties. An unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But a married man is anxious about the things of the world, how he may please his wife, and he is divided. An unmarried woman or a virgin is anxious about the things of the Lord, so that she may be holy in both body and spirit. A married woman, on the other hand, is anxious about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. I am telling you this for your own benefit, not to impose a restraint upon you, but for the sake of propriety, an inheritance to the Lord without distraction. Verbum Domini.
People in darkness have seen a great light. A radiant dawn shines on those lost in faith.
Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuo.
Lectio Sancti Evangelii secundum Marticum.
Gloria tibi, Domine.
Then they came to Capernaum, and on the Sabbath Jesus entered the synagogue and taught. The people were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. In their synagogue was a man with an unclean spirit. He cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus rebuked him and said, "Quiet, come out of him." The unclean spirit convulsed him, and with a loud cry came out of him. All were amazed and asked one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." His fame spread everywhere throughout the whole region of Galilee. Verbum Domini.
Laus tibi, Christe.
We see in the gospel that something new is happening, that Jesus is not just teaching from one of the rabbinical schools, he's not teaching from some school of theology, but he teaches as one having authority. There's a special newness and a power to the message that Jesus gives, right? He is the Word of God. His words have this power that pierce the heart. He is the Holy One of God. And we see in Mark's Gospel that there's all these exorcisms, that this battle is provoked and begun, that Jesus is overthrowing the kingdom of Satan. He's inaugurating his kingdom. And Satan doesn't go gently into that good night. We see this struggle, this battle. And this is all prophesied in the first reading today from the book of Deuteronomy. Moses spoke to all the people saying, "A prophet like me will the Lord your God raise up for you." A prophet like me. The Jews were looking for this. We see this in John chapter 6 at the Bread of Life discourses. Jesus performs a Moses-like miracle. He gives them bread, right, the manna. And that was a sign for them. It piqued their interest, and they started questioning him. They started to draw near to him when they saw this sign. Because Moses, even the call of Moses, the way Moses was called, was to be a template for future prophets. They would measure all their prophets by what they saw in the life of Moses. Now, Deuteronomy here says that you requested this at Horeb, at Mount Sinai, at the giving of the law. And if we remember that scene, Moses goes up Sinai and he tells the people, come to the base of the mountain, but don't touch the mountain, nor none of your livestock or anything is allowed to touch the mountain, or they'll be put to death. But the people, when they hear the thunder and see the lightning and the majesty of God, so to speak, or the power of God, they draw back even farther from the base. It's like, we don't want to even get there. Moses, you go up and you get the law and you bring it down to us. They drew back in fear. So we're told at the end of Deuteronomy, though, that there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. So there's this promises early in Deuteronomy that one will come like Moses, but then we're told at the end, one has not arisen like Moses, that had this special relationship. Moses went up to Sinai, he was there, and the great cloud would come down and he would speak to God face to face as a friend. So this doesn't simply refer to the institution of prophecy. There's this announcement of a new Moses, right, that's yet to be fulfilled, Deuteronomy tells us. Remember, Moses led the people out of Egypt. He was there and led the whole Exodus event. He went up to Sinai. He received the law. He brought down the law to the people and made a covenant. Remember, there's that powerful, dramatic scene at the base of Sinai where he gives them the law and he tells them this covenant and he asks, do you agree? Will you live by these precepts? And he offers sacrifice. He sacrifices a bull or something, takes the blood, sprinkles it on the altar, sprinkles it on the people, and that's a sign that through the blood of the sacrifice that there's this communion, right, with God. It's all, and the people say, yes, we'll live this covenant. And it's all a prefigurement of Jesus that's going to be fulfilled in the sacrifice of Christ on Calvary. But we see that it all falls short, right? They fail to maintain this covenant. And that Jesus is the new mediator, that he's leading us on a new and more radical exodus, not just from the physical slavery of Egypt, which is a powerful sign that in the way we understand what Jesus did for us, because he's conquering sin and death, right? He's leading us out of an even deeper bondage than physical slavery. He gives us a law, right? He gives us the new law to love as he has loved us. He gives us the Sermon on the Mount, teaches us the Our Father. So he's a new mediator. He has this new relationship with God the Father and a new relationship with us. Remember, with Moses, the people were rebelling, and we hear that in the responsorial psalm that refers to Meribah and Massah. Remember, they needed water in the desert, and Moses was told specifically how he was to strike the rock and things, and the water was to come forth. But at the same time, the people were rebelling, and Moses himself failed to show forth the sanctity of God there. And we're told at the end of Deuteronomy that because of that event, that he was angry with the people and somehow didn't show forth God's holiness, that he was not allowed to lead the people into the promised land. Right? Joshua would lead them into the land. Aaron and Moses would die there in the 40 years in the desert. So there's this continual falling short, right? And all of the Old Testament aches for this fulfillment, for someone who can deliver the fullness of the law, who can live it, bring it to fulfillment. So Jesus, he gives us, as being a new mediator, he has a new relationship with the Father. He has a new relationship with us. We're told that the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend, to a friend. But we're also told, and this is part of the confusing part, that God tells Moses, you cannot see my face. And remember that scene where the glory of God passes by. He has Moses go into the cleft of the rock, and he puts his hand over Moses, and his glory passes by, and Moses sees his back. So again, Moses as mediator has its limits. Face to face, though, what it's talking about is that this friendship with God. And Pope Benedict has said that this speaks of a distinctive way that the prophets of Israel were to exercise their office. That in surrounding religions and things, a prophet was to be like a soothsayer who would reveal the future. And in the Catechism, when it speaks of going to mediums and fortune tellers and forbids that, it says we have a temptation to want to know the future in order to control it. Right? That's the purpose of that. And so their surrounding religions would practice that form of prophecy. That's not the way Israel was to exercise prophecy. They were, as Benedict says, to show us the face of God, and in so doing, the prophet shows us the path that we have to take. That is the path to God. That the prophet, is to communicate God's will for us, to show us his plan. Not that we can have some control over the future, which what's fundamentally we're always tempted to want to do, but we're to have this discipleship, this surrender to God, to seek his will. So the new Moses, Jesus, will be granted what the first was refused, that he does see the Father face to face, that he has a real and immediate vision of the face of God. He's the mediator of a new and greater covenant, a covenant in his blood, that he sacrifices himself for us, that we can have communion with the Father. We're told in John 1:18, no one has ever seen God. It is the only Son who is nearest to the Father's heart who has made him known. That Jesus has this special relationship with the Father as Son, and he reveals the Father to us. Again, Pope Benedict says, he lives before the face of God not just as a friend, like Moses did, but as a son. He lives the most intimate unity with the Father. Jesus is the Son who reveals the Father. He testifies to what he has seen and heard. John tells us, he is the one from above, and that the Father loves the Son and has given everything over to him. Right? Everything that is his belongs to Jesus and to the Father, and that sharing of everything is offered to us. We see that on Sinai, Moses enters the cloud of God's presence, speaks to God as a friend, but Jesus lives before the face of God as a son. And I think this is what the gospel is telling us today, that his teaching is one with authority. He teaches with authority and power because it comes from knowing God face to face as Son. So Jesus is a new mediator with God and with us. And that's the really, really, really good news for us today. Moses would go up the mountain and down the mountain. He's the go-between, between the people and God. People stay away, right? But in Jesus, we're brought to this new closeness with the Father. The veil has been lifted, been removed, and we have communion with God, right? The distance is removed. Now we have communion with God in Jesus Christ. Our salvation is rooted in the love between the Father and the Son, right? That's the relationship we're coming to share in. And again, Pope Benedict writes that the disciple who walks with Jesus is thus caught up with him into communion with God. Right? We become a disciple, we belong to him, and in so doing, we belong to God. He is the way. He shows us the path. Through the incarnation, he comes down, shows us how to live, and in our discipleship, we have communion with God. We see St. Paul in the second reading today from 1 Corinthians. He speaks of celibacy as giving a special witness to this relationship. That we, the celibate, the unmarried man or woman, adheres to the Lord without distraction. Through baptism, we all belong to the Lord, right? We're all called to this communion, to this fellowship with Christ. And celibacy is an added gift, we could say, of belonging to him in a special way, that we are called to live the spirit of the Beatitudes, to manifest this special relationship. He says earlier in 1 Corinthians, let everyone lead the life which the Lord has assigned him and to which God has called him. He says other places, stay as you are, remain in that state that the Lord has placed you in. That we all have a special call, a special vocation, and that we are to live this communion with God expressed in different ways. The sacrament of marriage expresses the love of Jesus, the bridegroom, for his bride, the church. He lays down his life for her. And that certainly we see that in marriage in a very concrete way. The husband and the wife, in loving each other, manifest this giving, this self-giving, this sacrificial love, this permanent, faithful commitment to the other. It makes love real. Sometimes, our love can be abstract and we can kind of shape it and make it look a certain way. Married life witnesses in a very concrete way, what marriage looks like. What this love looks like, what Christian love looks like, that it demands discipline and sacrifice and gift and a real dying to self. I can say that as a celibate, that I'm witness to by what I see in couples and their very real and sacrificial love for one another and for their kids. As John Paul II has written so beautifully too, that marital love images the Trinitarian love, where the two become one flesh, that communion that happens in the Trinity through the giving of the three divine persons to one another. It's a communion of persons. And he writes that it brings down that love to earth, makes it concrete. I think a simple way to look at it, John tells us God is love. And where, there is love, there's going to be God. So in that marital love, we see God himself. Paul warns us, though, not to become worldly, right? And that's the temptation for the married couple, because they have to obviously have the things of the world. They live in the world. They have to provide for the family and for their children. And the danger is that they become too worldly in that providing. Maybe we could say, too, for the celibates, that they could become selfish, right? They could become very self-centered about their own lives. And St. Paul tells us, stay attentive to the things of the Lord. The celibate is supposed to stay focused to the Lord and to manifest this special father-son relationship that we see in Jesus, that he receives everything from his Father. And the celibate is supposed to live in a way that everything is about God in a very concrete way, right? That he gives and receives everything to the Lord. That, it could be a temptation maybe in apostolic ministry too, to make it about the work or whatever, to focus too much on others. And oftentimes at the root of that is just what we're receiving from others, and we lose our focus on God. For both states of life, God is always at the center. That, as St. Paul says later in 1 Corinthians, that we are to be detached from this passing world, to not make a God of this world. God alone is the one who can save us, not the things of this world and ultimately not other people, but God himself. We are to stay focused on him, to serve him, to be a disciple, and stay in communion with God through Jesus Christ.